Okay, so to set in an armhole, you've got to have a sleeve. So that's our sleeve, and you've got to have an armhole. You'll notice with our top here, just to pull it out, where our top we have a complete armhole. So we've stitched our shoulder together, we've stitched our side seam together, so we've got a complete loop armhole. Okay, so it's complete circular. So you need an armhole and a sleeve. What did we discover about our sleeve when we did our pattern? Can anyone remember about our measurements on our block?
It's bigger.
Oh, well done. Our armhole, the top of our sleeve head here, specifically, not the bottom from the notch to the notch underneath, that's the same, but the top is bigger on our sleeve head. So we have to run what we call an easing stitch. We're going to run an easing stitch from our single double notch all the way around to our single notch. An easing stitch is like a gathering stitch, except it's only one row, not two. Okay?
Does that mean that the top of the notch is not going to match up with the
No,
hem?
no, not in the slightest. Okay, so to run, what do we know about a gathering stitch? Well, it's really long. So let's turn it up to the biggest stitch length that we've got. So I've turned mine up to the biggest stitch length I've got. Nice long tails, pulling out nice long tails to begin and end. I'm starting where I'd find where your double notches are, or single notches, doesn't matter which way you go, that's my double notch. And I'm putting it in. Now when we do our easing stitch, we want our easing stitch exactly like a stay stitch or a gather to be within the seam allowance. Okay, so if our seam allowance to finish off is going to be 1 centimetre, we want our easing stitch to be less than 1 centimetre. So I am making sure that my easing stitch is less than 1 centimetre around my sleeve head. And I'm nice long stitch length, no back tack. Please do not back tack. If you don't do a long stitch length, you won't be able to ease it in. It just won't ease in. Okay, off I go, starting at my double notch all the way around. Oh, that got a bit small, didn't it? Come out to my centimetre. And if it happens to be not less than 1 centimetre, don't panic. You can always unpick it later. It's not a big deal. Unpick it afterwards. Okay, get to the end, needle right up top, nice long tails, pull it out. Okay, so now I've got my easing stitch, nice long tails either end, nice long big stitch length. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, just like we do when we gather, we grab our top thread only and we pull it in. As we pull it in, it starts to gather up, but what we do is we move that around to the top notch so it eases in. When you notice that it eases in, it'll tend to sit up like that. It tends to curve in and sit up because we want it to ease and we don't want it to gather. So I'm just easing it in to close up those stitches and that tension of that fabric. The same on the other side. Grab my top thread only. And I'm easing it in because now that and you'll see when you do ease it in, it does tend to curl up and sit up like that. That's the whole point of an ease. It tells me that that seam is getting smaller. And now I'm going to match it back to my garment. So I'm going to turn it in so the right side's out. And I'm going to find my armhole that it matches back to. Which armhole does it match back to? It matches back to, this is my back. So let's put it on the other side. So I'm putting the sleeve inside the armhole, matching at the underarm. So the right sides are together. So I've got my right side of my sleeve and the right side of my garment there, putting the two together, and then I'm going to pin them at my underarm. So I've pinned at my underarm to say that they're matching. So that's my right sides together. And I'm going to pin at my sleeve. There should be a notch for my sleeve head at the centre, which matches back with that notch at the shoulder seam. Pin the two together so that they match. And then I go to my single notch. So I should have a single notch on my armhole, I should have a single notch on my sleeve, and I'm going to pin to make sure they match. Then I'm going to go to my double notch on my sleeve, double notch on my armhole, pin those two together so that they match. And there shouldn't be any difference from my underarm, from my single notch, underarm to my side seam, back up to my double notch. Both of those sides on my sleeve and my armhole should be exactly the same. The ease should only be at the top side, not at the bottom. And then I can go back in, now that I've pinned it all together, and adjust my gathering stitch or my easing stitch so that it meets and matches perfectly. So those two match perfectly, which means I've got to put some more pins in. Okay, so pin them all so that they match perfectly. I want you to get up to that stage for me, please. So pin them so they match perfectly.